Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. Uh, Hello, I'm Abhishek Kumar from KPMG. Thanks to Climate Governance Malaysia. So we are, yeah, okay. Yeah, I think it was all early. Okay, thanks. Yeah. So we are the KPMG team here with my colleagues here, Tidan, Yelit, myself, Abhishek. Um, uh, we will be talking about pricing carbon, which nobody would like to pay. We all want the good things about green, etc., etc. But there is a price, and we'll talk about it. And I have the difficult job of trying to make it look good. So, we'll try. But just to make clear, this is supposed to be a discussion-based approach. It's not a one-way traffic. Um, I'll go to the agenda. We have some, and we are using an online tool to interact with you. Uh, okay. First of all, about myself, I am a partner in KPMG Malaysia. I lead the practice where we do two types of services. One is the development of the policy. We are currently supporting government stakeholders in the carbon pricing policy. We do also work on the energy sector. We are supporting on the adoption of various reportings on the ESG framework. My colleague earlier from the sustainability team also had a session in the morning. Okay? Uh, I have been in Malaysia now for almost 9 years, working here closely. So that's about me. Now let's go to the structure. We'll be following this, broadly these six contents. Number one, I will present a bit about what is this carbon pricing, going on globally. Talk about a bit of context in ASEAN, what's happening. Then we'll go, broadly about cover what could be the impact of carbon price. We will take carbon tax as an example. We'll talk about that. Then we will have a discussion. When we say Q&A, it's more about there are some questions we have. We would like to understand from your side, what do you think are the answers? Because currently there's no carbon price in Malaysia. So we would like to understand, we take feedback, gather and put together. There is a case study that we have. We will share some insights from it. Then just a one slide summary of how to prepare for carbon pricing, ideas about it. It's not comprehensive, but we would like to build on it. And finally, open dialogue. If there is any feedback, etc., anything to contribute, it will be great. Okay. So let's go to the next. We have one question. So request you to just scan the QR code. You can see in this side. We're waiting my colleague to do something. Sorry, I don't have control over these things. We tried to use less paper. We really tried, but we are. You have scanned the QR code? Okay. Okay. You don't have any reception. Okay. Maybe we should stick to paper, but sorry. Just just out of your, those who can, what do you think about putting a price on carbon? Good, bad, ugly, or it depends? Just an initial view, even if you don't know, etc. What do you think? Whoa. Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, with that in context, I think this will be a very positive session. So, that's good. Okay, now I think we skipped. Now let's go to the wow. It depends is very important. We'll talk about, it depends when we get to the questions later. Um, just to be, put on the same context, we will give a brief, introduction of the carbon pricing now. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Globally, we have the survey on the carbon pricing. There are different tools being adopted, and price on carbon is being put. More than 70 regions in the world have already adopted some form of a mechanism to price the carbon. There are some regions which are already looking at not just pricing the carbon domestically, but also on the cross-border movement of goods. So things are happening, and when a pricing of carbon is being done, it's not just putting a price like say a ringgit or a dollar on the ton of carbon equivalent, but it's a policy tools that are used across. There would be some policy. There's like a bouquet of policies being implemented to support these carbon pricing instruments. We will touch upon some of the aspects which is used to price when we say carbon later. And just to the global theme, second part is it's not just about domestic. Even imports are being, you would have already heard about cross-border mechanism from European Union. That's the most controversial one recently that is being talked about, which is affecting or which will affect all the trading parties. Good or bad, we will see. But mechanisms are being put in place. Okay. Now, going from that to straight in Malaysia, what is being already discussed. First of all, there are 5 types of carbon pricing instruments. It does not mean only one is selected or only 2. There can be different tools that can be affected. So carbon pricing, the obvious ones we know is tax. Put a tax on the carbon, which is carbon tax. Then you can cap the emissions, carbon cap. You can have offset. If you produce something, you offset somewhere else, or you can buy. You can just buy carbon credits. You can trade, which is now fully trading mechanism. So different instruments are there, and there could be a region where you can have tax to a certain limit. Beyond that, you can maybe do offsets. Beyond certain, you may trade your emissions with somebody else who is not emitting that much. So different tools can be used to target the emissions. Currently in Malaysia, we have the voluntary carbon market, but on the compliance side from enforcement, there is none. But what is being already studied, which is already in public domain, is either a carbon tax or emission trading scheme, which was also announced in RMK 12, but the implementation is still being studied. So that's why you see the 3 red circles here: carbon tax, credits, which is related to the carbon market, voluntary carbon market, and the emissions trading scheme. The carbon tax and emission trading scheme have, they are also called the regulated carbon markets. So they have an interaction with each other. So I will just introduce the concept in the next slide. Okay. Now, emissions trading scheme, carbon tax. They are compliance, market regulated, implemented by the government. Both have the ultimate objective is to reduce emissions. The left side emission trading scheme does not explicitly put a price, what should be the price of the carbon, but on the right side, carbon tax straight away says this is the price that you have to pay if you emit. On the left side, the government will decide a free allowance, and then beyond that, it will auction initial allowance. It will ask all the parties to go in a market and buy and sell emissions reduction plus minus. So through that, you discover the price of carbon. Just for reference, $100 per ton, is being talked about the price of carbon in some trading market. Carbon tax. We know our neighbor Singapore has moved to $5. Will move to 25, 40, 50, or 80, depending on the timeline that's already there. Indonesia talked about carbon tax, but not implement. But whereas the cap and trade mechanism is being implemented. Anyway, so coming back here is two different regulatory mechanism, objective same, reduce emissions. On the left side, emission trading scheme, government does not actively take the money from the emission side. It does take through alternate mechanism is to auction the allowances, but on the right side, carbon tax, straight away government takes a revenue. Now, carbon tax, when it's designed, it's not just about one policy which is to take revenue, but how do you put back the revenue in the targeted way so that the citizens are not negatively affected. So it's a policy tool where few levers are touched when you design a carbon tax. Emission trading scheme is more about just letting the industry, the companies on their own figure a way out through pricing the emissions on their own. Which is good, which is bad, that's a judgment we will not make here. It's but slowly over time it is realized. And economy may start with one and not do the other, or they may do both. It depends on the local dynamics and the objectives that is there. One thing is always tried is that there is no overlap. So one emission is not also subject to ETS and carbon tax. That does not happen. It has to be separate. So it will be always separated out. That's a very important step that is understood, not to have an overlap on any price burden on the producers. Okay. Now, one of the objective of trying to do this is by pricing emissions is to cycle it back to lowering the or moving to the green energy, a green way of producing energy or utilizing energy, which is we try to illustrate here. It does this slide we just try to illustrate in a way where how carbon tax on the right side or emission trading scheme on the left side can interact with each other if it is structured properly. This slide does not answer all the questions about the carbon pricing, but it tries to link it together. On the center is still the government. Government prices, which is puts a tax. Unfortunately, we have to call tax. And then government, asks the emitters to pay the tax. That becomes a revenue. The revenue is now cycled back either through the government kitty or investment supported by the government to move towards greener form of energy processing. Those who are able to process better, more efficiently, they sell credits, which again goes back to the industry to buy and sell, and it goes back to So there is an overlap of these two. You can remove the right side completely, which is the carbon tax, and let the buy and sell happen, or you can have tax and let the government decide who gets what money from the revenue that is collected. A balance has to be done. Pretty much a whole uh, region or a country based macroeconomic model has to be analyzed, all the sectors, to really understand what will be the outcome if a certain price is put on a certain industry, because we will, when the carbon tax is applied, typically it is applied on the highest energy intensive industry. Generally that's the case. So the impact will result in the whole economy, and that needs to be analyzed very carefully and very mathematically, and then only a decision is taken, and it's always a cycle that's done. We have had already announcements in the industrial master plan, the NETR that was launched, that carbon pricing is being studied. When it will come, what, we'll see. By the way, any questions you can ask, please free to raise it now. Yes, please. Yes. Yeah, it is. But then if you put together, then it becomes a cap and trade. You can separate it also, just cap. Beyond that, it's not allowed. You know, you can have all those mechanisms, or you can put together in a cap and trade emission trading scheme. Okay. Now moving on, just to recap, in the ASEAN setup, almost all the countries are either in process of implementing a carbon pricing mechanism, or are studying how to implement. Indonesia, there is a delay in carbon tax. It is a sort of a nominal $2, which is okay because it starts slow. It allows the economy to absorb a low amount. Then power sector is supposed to start for Indonesia, the emission trading scheme, the cap and trade that you said. We have Vietnam, Philippines in process. Singapore is advanced straight away, tax, and now it's going to wrap up. Singapore is a good reference because it has carefully studied the potential impact on the economy and developed mechanisms to offset the negative impact, as well as invest into transition, into more less intensive processes. Okay. Now moving on, let's start with a general hypothesis. I know the audience here is favoring good. Carbon price is good. But generally when we deal with putting a price, or say carbon tax, the straight away feedback is bad. It's not good. Things will go bad. It will, everything will be finished. Malaysian economy will be finished. There's nothing left. That is the kind of arguments we straight away hear. Fair enough. But then so that's what we try to illustrate here. Implement a CPI, bad for producers, bad for trade. Our trade will be finished. There will be no jobs left. Nothing will happen. Everything is bad. These are the exact feedback that we get. The energy cost will increase. TNB's tariff is very high. We'll have to pay so much, and so on and so forth. But yeah, fair enough. It's very important that when we do the policy, we try to really take the feedback. And the question is how do we take that feedback and put together, balance the equation on the other side, so that this apocalypse does not happen. So that's a very important thing that we try to do. Now, this is when we talk about any carbon pricing mechanism, it is domestic based. Now, with the developments in the pricing of carbon, you have international. So even though we may choose not to put any carbon price mechanism, but because of the trade, we will have an indirect carbon price because of our trading partners. Can we avoid it? We may choose to shift to some other country for, is it so easy? Maybe no, but then it's not a good position to be in. We will talk about and the one we'll talk with is the European Union's CBAM, which is the cross-border adjustment mechanism. Yeah, cross-border adjustment mechanism, CBAM. Okay, then I wrote it completely wrong. Okay. Thank you very much for correcting me. Thank you. Carbon border. Okay. So let's go into the scenario one, carbon pricing. Let's try to see. Our hypothesis is a carbon price mechanism will allow a new tool to change the competitiveness of an industry. So if companies, you may have same raw material, same output product, but the process with which a raw material is converted, that will become a part of the competitiveness for the industry. And we just try to give a very simple illustration. A more traditional approach of production with high GHG emission will result in higher burden of tax and low. And that will become a point of competitive, of who will be more priced. So carbon pricing may not be bad for everyone. And that is where carbon price allows to make a change in the production, in how goods are produced. That's one scenario. Second scenario is just to introduce a new terminology, it's a product carbon footprint. So it's not just about the greenhouse gas that a company emits, but it includes the embedded carbon that you even get in your raw materials, in the equipment that you have. So all that is a part of the product carbon footprint. So you may be a company, having different suppliers, and eventually you process a final output which you have, you export to a certain entity. But there is a scenario where with the carbon price in the importing country, you may choose to now shift the suppliers away from high energy intensive raw material suppliers to a lower, and that's the detail which just changes the competitiveness, even the supply chain, how you will have to manage the supply chain and become more competitive to an alternate, your own competitor who may have a different supply chain than you completely. That's why carbon price is not just about putting a price on the carbon, but it also encourages the change and really shift away from who will become more competitive by the adoption of better and more technologies which allow for less emissions of carbon. So these are just two illustrative scenarios on how the business or the industry may get impacted with the introduction of carbon pricing. So I think you said good, but I'm sure when we go out, those who will be negatively impacted will say it is bad, but those who are prepared for it will say it is good. No problem at all for them. Okay. Now, moving on about a bit more context about the European Union CBAM. The objective of to introduce CBAM was originally when the carbon price mechanism was put in place in European Union. It focused on the domestic part. So as a strategy, the companies, the producers shifted their supply chain outside of EU, and which were not subject to carbon price. Yeah, so EU managed to reduce the carbon emissions there for producers, but not by having efficient production, efficient supply chain, but just by geographical strategy. And it created a kind of it destroyed the level, there was no level playing field. So what CBAM intends to do is, if your supply chain for certain sectors is based in countries where you still have high energy intensive manufacturing or energy supply chain, a price will be put. So it is more like an imported greenhouse gas price, an imported greenhouse gas, which is, the coverage is very widespread. There's a lot of chaos globally, and how do you it's still not implemented, but EU is really trying to bring the imported greenhouse gas under the purview of its carbon price mechanism. And highly likely, whatever carbon price will be there will be linked to the EU ETS, which is like $100 plus price that will be applied. So without any change or any carbon price, let's say in Malaysia, automatically the suppliers are exposed to this price mechanism. So the question is, do you pay a price when you export to EU, or you think about a carbon price in Malaysia so that the money remains here in the economy? So those are the questions to consider, to accept or the CBAM mechanism that's being talked about. And other countries have also talked about it. You have New Zealand, Australia, US is also talking about it. The same, UK is also talking about these kind of cross-border pricing mechanisms on greenhouse gas.
Voluntary carbon exchange market. How does that correlate with this CBAM, the trading policy you're saying? So just now you're saying, is Malaysian exporters just going to pay the tax, or Malaysia set up a carbon pricing policy? What do you mean?
So we don't have the policy yet to decide what will be the tool to be done, will be implemented.
I beg your pardon. That means we don't. Country doesn't have policy yet, but Bursa has taken its initiative to set up an exchange.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
I got the context right. Thank you.
So BCX has been started, but it is yet to be seen how it will be included and what sort of allowance will be provided. We don't know that yet. Nothing is firm on that. Correct. It's we are on the way there. That's a better way to put it. Yeah. The risk is there. How strong it will be actually, we will have to wait and watch on those risks, or we become more proactive and and participate in the mechanism to really reduce the risk on Malaysian economy.
EU member states, what they did was, they were all asked to reduce their emissions. So what these guys did, they went out to, Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN countries, and they set up industries there thinking that, they won't get caught one day. Now, when you export it back to the EU, if you don't reduce the emissions as much as they do, then you're going to be penalized.
Yep.
So I think, if we are manufacturing, steel, cement, and you're exporting it to the EU,
yeah.
you have no choice. You have to bring it down to the same level as the European countries, or they will penalize you. As it is, it's 100 EU, I think, now per ton of CO2. And then on top of that, if you, can't even trade the stuff that you can't reduce, you're going to be penalized.
Yeah, yeah. So it is a real risk that exists. How strong and when, that is the policy, because a few countries have already complained to the WTO.
Yeah, but it comes into effect next year.
Yeah.
End of the year, you've got a year to get your act together.
Yes. Yep, that's true. But we have to also keep in, sorry. Yeah, please, it's good. Yeah.
So if Malaysia, has Singapore first of all got its pricing policy regulated yet?
Yeah, carbon tax price is already.
So they'll be hit less, I guess. But can you kindly elaborate a bit, having their carbon pricing policy, how Singapore or rather Malaysia would be hit less by the CBAM tax?
This is hypothetically, because there is no policy yet. Now, if a certain price on carbon is implemented in the policy and it is discussed with EU that there has to be some allowance for Malaysia to apply, then it can impact less. If a price is applied in Malaysia and it is accepted by EU, that okay. So there has to be a domestic price mechanism to allow the manufacturers and the exporters to comply to the EU, because if you pay a price in your own country of your production which is accepted by EU, then okay. But then there are some guidelines right now on it. I'm not fully aware of all the guidelines, but there are some guidelines around it. Yeah.
Where if let's say our tax is $5 and EU is 100, and you pay the difference to EU, or you're not sure, would that be one possible mechanism?
Yeah, those sort of mechanisms need to be discussed. Yeah, or you pay a full. Those things have not been finalized. Yeah, because there's nothing here. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, no problem. Now, to align with the requirements, these are just some examples of non-price options that exist today, preempting. Yeah, I know. Still there is a lot of imported data. You import a lot of carbon internally from energy, the power sector side. Yeah, you cannot really control everything that's coming through. But whatever is in the control, see what are the mechanisms to reduce, if you can have green electricity on your side, or with the corporate power purchase program where you have the green power purchase agreements, can you really, so those are the things that can be considered as a non-price mechanism to reduce your emissions and comply with the requirement of the EU CBAM. Now, moving on, we have, this is more like, we would like to gather your feedback on certain questions we have. If you are not able to answer those questions, that is also a feedback. So we will we'll go into that. We'll go back to the mobile one, please. I don't know. Can you see it? We would like to also understand an elaboration when you say high impact. I would like a volunteer to say why a high impact you are saying or a moderate impact, please. Can we have a volunteer who said, okay, sure, about this question or?
It's about the impact.
Okay.
Okay, Berjaya does not have export business to Europe in the context of CBAM, but we have a subsidiary, HR Owen, which is a high-end luxury car retailer. It exports its car to the Europe. So, would you consider that having impact? I mean, they have European customers.
I don't know.
So, is it high or mid or low? So, how do you measure?
Oh, this may not be about only CBAM, but carbon price. If a carbon price is applied here, then if a carbon price is applied here, what do you think about the impact? I don't know the answer to that question. Sorry?
To answer this question?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Please.
so it depends on whether the organization has set net zero targets. We have. So our net zero target is for 2040. So by 2030, 2025, we'll have the entire organization with 40% reduction in emissions, right? So of course, there will be some impact, a moderate impact if there's a tax tomorrow. But, you know, you're talking to this audience here who are all practically climate activists, and we feel that with the climate emergency now, if there is a carbon tax, that will really get all organizations to reduce their carbon footprint. So that's why you got the first answer, yes, you know, let's go for a tax, because we want to help save ourselves and this planet, you know, and the sooner the better. So that's the only way, you know, we're going to do it, because otherwise everybody is going to be happily continuing to emit carbon. Yeah?
Yep, thank you. There was, I think I remember 7 responses which says it depends. That's also very fun. Yes, but good. Yeah. Okay. Anybody would like to impact on, elaborate on the high impact? Who put high impact? Please. Somebody put high impact. 9 of them. And now nobody? Yeah, please.
From what we did, our scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 calculations, the emissions are very high. And when we did our projection of how much we will pay, it will seriously affect our business. So that's why we are looking into ways to slowly reduce our emissions, mainly through energy efficiency. Yeah.
That's great. Like energy efficiency, very important. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yes.
So I want to say something about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3.
Mm-hmm.
If every single one of us do scope 1, scope 2, there will be no scope 3. Because the highest contribution for our greenhouse gas emission is actually coming from scope 3, our supply chain.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's upward or downstream. So if every single one of us do this, scope 1 and scope 2, if every single one of you guys do this, by 2030, all of us can be net zero. Actually.
Or the largest companies the biggest companies focus on scope 3. Automatically it will go to everyone. Yeah.
If everyone, like the lady says that, okay, I mean, we all scope 1 and 2 calculate already, there won't be scope 3.
That's true. That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Scope 1 and scope 2, because scope 1 and scope 2 is our operation, the energies that we get through.
Yeah.
So if I buy from you and your scope 1 and scope 2 is okay, 0, you're my scope 3. Yeah, I'm fine. You know, so I think that's the main thing. That's why maybe, you know, the push towards this carbon tax should be implemented, because when you do this, then the incentive, there is a financial incentives for all the corporations to do it. Now the only thing that we need to do is to understand how much it can impact, so that you don't like, okay, let's do it next year, which is kind of crazy. Everybody will just go crazy. There should be a stage, more measured approach, but it should be implemented.
Okay. So my takeaway from this response is the timing, the sequencing of the amount, right? Okay. Right. And, you know, leading to that, sorry?
Where they mandated the Malaysian sustainable palm oil certification. They forced the whole industry to be certified sustainable. 98%. It's unprecedented that 98% of the sector is certified sustainable. Okay, yeah, there are some problems in it, but still, that's a huge part, you know, that you're doing, and nowhere else in the world has a whole sector, and I'm talking about from the plantation down to the mills to the refineries, that they have been certified. So, and it is done in a different phase. The bigger players must be done almost like immediately, but you know, the smallholders were given 3-4 years. I mean, you have to do it that way, but you have to make it mandatory.
So my third takeaway from this discussion, right now the feedback is, look at the big ones first, and then also, but for the small ones who, you know, sequence it, right? That's great. Yeah. I think what's required is a more, you know, open stakeholder engagement with the policymakers. That's my, you know, another takeaway. I had written these things down earlier.
Yeah, they engage with the policymakers and all that, and they have, with the Asia Foundation, they have come up with a paper on, you know, carbon tax and everything for the country.
Yeah, the Darshan, we know.
Darshan Joshi,
yes, Darshan Joshi.
Yeah.
He is the coordinator for our carbon pricing project on the world.
Also,
we know
okay.
That.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's. Next question. Which part of your business will get impacted the most with carbon tax? Now, number one, just to explain a bit more, is illustrative of the equipments that you put. So you will buy equipments. So, you know, through the capital investment that you get, is that the one, or your business operations? It could be from logistics and or the export side. Okay. In this sample size, what we see is both operations and even the capital investment, or the normal business operations almost equally. Oh, trade also now. Can we have a bit of insight from somebody who's talked about the business operations, please? Have you put business operations? Do we have any volunteer who can talk about, what they have selected and why? The equipment and machineries, anybody? No? Okay. Okay, I would like to know, on the business operations, is there anybody who is, who could face from the transport and logistics part of the supply chain? Is there anybody here? No? Transport is number 2 emitter in Malaysia. Transport. So anybody who uses transport and logistics in Malaysia, you already have very high, as was pointed out, the scope 3. Okay. Okay, let's move to the next one then. This just tries to, now we answered the question about the equipment, business operations, trade, but severity means, how severe will be the impact on this part of your business. Do we have now any volunteer to just elaborate a bit more on the severity part for business operations? No? Okay. But generally it is right, the business operations part will be the highest because of the energy side, the imported energy from the grid, or what is applied in the transportation of your goods, raw materials. That is the area which will be impacted the most, and it will also get included in the equipment and machineries when you invest from a supplier who has got high business operations and risk of carbon tax. Okay. We have only 2 more questions. The next one, please. How ready do you think? In the next one, sorry.
So if you don't ask how many SMEs, the one who's answering, we are not SMEs, so it's not right for us to ask on their behalf. So maybe you should find out how many SMEs are present in this in this room.
Yeah, good point. I missed that. How many SMEs are there? Nobody.
How relevant is this question then?
Let's remove SMEs and ask the question, how ready is your business to adopt? So when we consolidate, we are going to remove the SME word and the data for that. how ready is your business? Which is a fair answer, actually, not ready. Actually, if it is 0, that's also okay. I think our takeaway from this is that there needs to be capability development exercise that is required for the economy as whole for carbon pricing instruments. One was stakeholder engagement, that was there first. Second is the capability development. Capability to be able to understand how it will impact and better understanding on the businesses. Yeah, last one. Let's again remove the word SME and get the answer. What type of support would be required for adoption? We understood the capability part, but now we're trying to elaborate a bit more. Is fair enough? Yeah. Okay, thank you for the feedback. These are useful, really useful feedback. And this is what we are gathering is completely as expected because of no mechanism that exists. Stakeholder engagement has to happen, capability development has to happen. There has to be initial grants, compensation mechanisms. Even if we look at the case study from Singapore, you will see the same mechanisms which were put in the carbon tax policy. Okay. Let's go to the slide on case study on Singapore. Okay, just it's only one slide. We did try to make the slide for SME. We tried to highlight that. But then on a general basis, the way it is implemented is it covers 80% of the GHG emissions. It is targeted towards larger enterprises. But because of the supply chain that exists, which leads into the larger enterprises, there has to be a more holistic coverage to support the adoption of carbon tax for the export risk where trade exposure is there. The government supports through allowances for the companies which have a risk on that. So it's just not about having a domestic mechanism, but also looking at the trade impact that was applied in Singapore. Now we will be just wrapping up. Now, possible strategies. This is not a full list. They are just indicative starting point. We talked about the energy usage, the logistics, the manufacturing process, the technologies. The key takeaway is to look at more efficient way of using energy, either having your own, if possible, renewable energy so that you are able to offset from the high carbon grid import unless TNB or utilities adopt more green electricity supply. Look at reducing wastage in your warehousing logistics, looking into investment in electric vehicles, more efficient manufacturing processes, green building, design, etc. This is just some of the incentive mechanisms. We know that the GITA and GUIDE are supposed to end this year. But that's another mechanism which has existed, the financing scheme, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the mechanisms to reduce carbon pricing exposure. And finally, talking about considerations for companies, it's not about SMEs here. So first of all, to be able to assess the impact, adopt a monitoring, reporting, and verification system, and get all the actions or reductions verified, and reporting mechanism, the compliance and reporting mechanisms to be adopted for more green related green transition of your businesses. Okay. Okay. Actually, our time is up. We are finished. So we have had good discussions already. So is there any feedback, anything that you'd like to share? Otherwise, okay, sure. Yes, please. Sorry, you said
Carbon reduction and decarbonization.
yes.
Similar meaning? Yeah?
Yes. Yeah. For the purposes, yes. Reduction of carbon emissions.
Carbon avoidance is also decarbonization, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So maybe decarbonization would be the umbrella term. Would you agree?
Reduction of carbon through avoiding also. Yeah. Avoiding and reducing. Yeah.
Because carbon is only one of the greenhouse gases, although it's the largest, but I think there's a lot of attention on methane, because methane is a lot more lethal, but although it lasts shorter, but the shorter period is still quite long for us, I think 30, 40 years, so it's not helpful to have any methane going up as well.
Generally, when we talk about carbon reduction, we cover the 6 gases. So it's an easier way to communicate. So generally, it is the 6 gases. Yeah. No, I completely understand that. It does cover 6 gases straight away, but it's very difficult to say carbon, sulfur, nitrogen, blah, blah, blah. Just say one. Yeah.
Okay, probably very irrelevant at this stage, but I would use GHG reduction to cover all greenhouse gases, and then carbon reduction just to be a bit more specific with carbon. I think yesterday we also had a debate on whether there's a difference between net zero and carbon neutrality.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a difference? Because some are saying it's used interchangeably, which I don't agree. Yeah.
They are
right?
They are different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't look too much into what is in the media, right? The title. A lot of time they got it wrong.
Yeah, because
Some media, part number got it wrong.
yesterday someone was using it interchangeably. So I put forward, I said it's not the same. Net zero and being carbon neutral are quite different.
Yep.
But someone said it was the same, so just want to get the definitions right as well.
No, it's not the same. Not the same.
Carbon neutral by 2030 in 7 years' time. So all they're doing is offsetting, their emissions. And how do they offset? They go and buy credits, and in 7 years' time they will be carbon neutral. But if you're looking at net zero, then it's looking at science-based targets. So that's looking at your absolute emissions and reducing it, and then at the end, I think you're allowed to offset maybe 5 to 10%. That's it.
Last offset is the last strategy. Yeah. Avoid. That's the last. one.
Reduction, removal, and avoidance. But the point being is that offset is the very last part. And when you talk about carbon neutral, generally it's only on scope 1 and scope 2.
Somebody made a very naughty point. One of the speaker, day one morning. He was kind of like tickle us to think. How about me planting a tree in my backyard help you to offset your carbon emission? It's loosely speaking, but it's not entirely wrong. What about me planting a tree at the back of my house, my yard? He's talking about carbon exchange. I mean, you buy points to offset your carbon emission. But I suppose it's not wrong, but it's not entirely correct also. Yeah.
I will stay away from making any comment on that. There are things you will see on news about all these things. I'll stay away from. I'm not going to make a judgment on.
No. Just a speaker mentioning that in the context of others to think harder. But I think it works. It's just different form of getting to the same objective. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you see everything that we have talked about is here, actual in the production, which is efficiency, improvement, etc. So we have not gone ahead and talked about that part at all.
Hello.
Can I just add on to that? A lot of people are reforesting, right, and putting, trees, million trees and all that. So even on the board, I asked the management, so who is monitoring, whether the trees are actually growing? Someone has to do that too, right? You say you're going to plant a tree, how many % of it is actually, and by the time you want to sequester, it has to be a fairly large tree. So all that is to be considered.
So just want to ask, right? So the government announced like some programs that are related to giving credits, such as the corporate green power agreement, the CGPA, which is giving RECs. So when we talk about offsetting, are you foreseeing that it may be obsolete? Things like carbon credits and RECs will it be obsolete in the near future?
To be honest, I cannot foresee all those things, but as a part of the overall policy development, these are the things that should happen in the stakeholder engagement to understand what has been invested and then how that concluded. I cannot give a firm answer to that. Yeah. But it is part of the stakeholder exercise that needs to be brought up.
Yeah, because one of the concerns, right, like the corporate green power agreement, you need to be in a contract for like 21 years. You need to subscribe to pay for the green energy for 21 years. So in the near future, maybe in the next 10 years, suddenly it's obsolete. Then us as the customers, we're not getting anything. We're getting losses. We're burning money.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think taking all this as a single individual topic is not the right way. It has to be a sort of a holistic, like the carbon tax, like the carbon credits, the carbon financing, because from the previous panel, there was this guy was talking about the fact that you have to give a sort of a carbon fine credit to trees that you have or areas that you have sequestered, because then it gives it financial incentive to keep the forest. So I think you cannot just take about, okay, carbon credit, carbon offset. You need to take this whole solution as one whole package, and it has to work for different aspects of what is required for different industries or different companies. I think it's not practical to say, oh yeah, it's going to be for 21 years, it's going to work. It has to work in conjunction with other incentives or mandatory requirements. I think then it will stay on. Otherwise, it will just like, like a shooting star, it goes up and then, it goes off.
That's true. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, I have been told to close, and thank you very much for your time. Hope it was, to me it was a very interesting discussion and feedback, and thank you very much. I think you still have 2 more hours of sessions. Enjoy. Thank you very much.